For 10,000 years, hunger has been humanity's shadow. It shaped the first villages, drove the rise of empires, and sparked revolutions that toppled kings. It carved faith into rituals of fasting and feasting, and it marched with armies as both ally and enemy. Hunger has never been just the absence of food, it has been the architect of civilization, the unspoken force guiding choices, conflicts, and dreams. From the scattering of wild seeds in the Fertile Crescent to the crowded supermarkets of today, the story of hunger is also the story of us. It tells of how people bent rivers to their will, how rulers built power from granaries, and how ordinary families endured in times of scarcity and excess alike. Even in an age of plenty, hunger lingers sometimes in empty bowls, sometimes in hidden malnutrition, sometimes in the gnawing fear of what tomorrow will bring. This is the history of hunger, the quiet master of humanity. Sorry for the interruption. Where are you tuning in from? Drop it in the comments. The sun burns low and relentless over the wide, cracked soil of the Fertile Crescent. Once, a river coursed here with generosity, spilling life across its banks, feeding reeds, fish, and the great herds that drew hunters close. Now its bed lies shallow, the current whispering weakly over exposed stones. The land is still, save for the restless winds that scatter dust across the feet of those who linger too long. A small family stands on this edge of uncertainty. Their skin is tanned, their ribs faintly visible beneath the stretched leather of their bodies. They are hunter-gatherers, children of a rhythm older than memory, used to following herds and plucking berries from thickets. But the herds have gone elsewhere. The bushes bear no fruit. The once reliable river has betrayed them, leaving only thirst and the gnawing emptiness of hunger. The father crouches in silence, tracing a line in the soil with a stick, his eyes fixed not on the horizon but on the dirt itself, as if the ground might whisper secrets of survival. The mother clutches a child to her chest, rocking gently, though her milk runs thin. Another child crouches near the riverbed, searching for clams beneath the stones. The effort is futile. The river does not yield what it once did. Hunger sharpens their thoughts, makes every sound urgent. A bird caws overhead and all eyes snap toward it. Could its nest mean eggs? Could its flight lead to food? Every decision narrows to one question: how do we eat? In this crucible of emptiness, imagination flickers. A few scattered seeds, fallen near an old fire pit, have sprouted fragile shoots in the damp earth where water once pooled. The family notices. It is small, hardly a meal, yet in their minds a strange idea begins to form: food that grows from the soil itself. They do not yet call it farming. They do not yet know this moment will echo through millennia. All they know is that the wild has failed them, and hunger will not wait. The child's hand brushes one of the sprouts, and the mother's eyes linger on it, curious, desperate. Hunger becomes the first teacher, whispering that perhaps the answer lies not in chasing herds across endless miles, but in bending the soil to their will. The family does not understand they are standing at the doorway of civilization. They feel only the ache in their bellies and the fear of tomorrow, yet this fear is the architect of change. Hunger, pitiless and unrelenting, drives them to see the land not as a place to wander, but as a place to command. Civilization begins not with abundance, but with an empty bowl. The nights are colder now, and the family huddles close to the fire. The flames crackle and spit, throwing sparks into the dark, where the vast emptiness of the steppe stretches beyond sight. Around the fire lie remnants of their foraging: a few stalks of wild wheat, stripped hastily of grain, and the hollow husks of barley chewed for what little they could offer. The harvest from the wild was meager, but hunger dulls no appetite. They eat it anyway, leaving fragments scattered on the hard earth. When dawn rises, the fire has dwindled to embers, and the ground around the camp is littered with the refuse of the night before. Rain has come, a brief shower that darkened the soil and pressed the discarded seeds deep into the mud. No one notices, not at first. They wander and return, restless, searching for what they cannot find. But then the children, playing near the fire pit, spot a miracle. green shoots pushing stubbornly upward from the soil, thin blades trembling in the wind. The adults gather around, puzzled. They recognize the shape, the look of wild wheat, of barley, but here it grows where no field or meadow stands. It grows where they slept, where they spilled, where they ate. It grows from their waste. For the first time, the family sees food not as something hunted or stumbled upon, but as something called forth by accident, coaxed from the ground itself. They linger longer now, watching the shoots lengthen day by day. They do not yet know the word planting. They do not yet measure time and seasons, but instinct tells them this is not chance alone. The father scatters a few more seeds into the damp earth, curious. The mother waters them with a skin of river water, careful not to disturb the fragile stalks. Each act is tentative, guided not by knowledge but by hunger and hope. Weeks turn into moons. The stalks grow taller, golden heads bowing in the wind. The family waits, their bellies still lean but their eyes fixed on the promise swaying before them. When the first grains are harvested, it is with reverence. They crush them into meal, bake them on stones, and taste something more than food. They taste survival that does not run away on hooves or hide in the forest. It is a quiet revolution, born in silence, in accident, in desperation. A seed dropped by fire becomes a seed of change. For the first time, humanity begins to root itself to the land. The wild will no longer dictate every meal. Hunger has shown them a path forward, food that grows where hands command it. Survival pulled from the soil itself. The soil gives, but never enough. The wild grains sprout and ripen, yet hunger remains a constant shadow. The family learns to scatter more seed, to clear patches of land near the river's edge, to linger longer than their ancestors would have dared. Soon they find themselves bound to the soil, compelled to wait for harvests instead of chasing herds across endless miles. And as they wait, others come. Strangers at first, small bands of families also drawn by the whisper of survival set their fires nearby. The camps multiply like the shoots in the fields, clustering together in a fragile community born of hunger. The days stretch into seasons. Mud, once used only to seal the cracks of fire pits, is pressed into bricks. Huts rise where tents once stood, rough walls hardened by the Sunday. They are not grand, not comfortable, but they shield against the wind and the cold. With huts comes permanence, and with permanence comes the question of tomorrow. Where to store the grain, where to keep the seeds safe from birds, from insects, from theft. Shallow pits are dug into the earth, lined with woven reeds and stone. The first vaults of human survival. Each pit is a promise. We will eat again, if we can only guard what the land has given us. The rhythm of life changes. No longer do footsteps trace endless migrations across valleys and hills. Instead, hands till soil, mend walls, patch roofs. Children scatter seeds and fetch water, while the elders guard the pits. The fire no longer marks a temporary camp. It glows at the center of something that resembles a village. But hunger is never absent, failed rains still come, a bad season still threatens every stomach. And so the people gather, sharing stories and rituals around the fire, binding themselves together against the fear of emptiness. What was once a family becomes a community, not by choice, but by necessity. For in the face of hunger, survival demands cooperation. The river valley begins to hum with life. Smoke curls from more huts, fields stretch wider each year, and paths worn by countless feet crisscross the soil. No one speaks of it, yet all know. They have become something new. They are no longer wanderers of the wild. They are settlers, builders, keepers of the grain. Civilization has taken its first fragile shape not from abundance, but from desperation. Hunger is the mortar between the bricks, the unseen architect of the village that now clings to the land. The first harvests had felt like victory. Stalks cut and bundled, pits filled with grain, meals stretched further than the wild had ever allowed. But the following season betrays them. The rains do not come, Clouds pass without breaking, and the river shrinks to a thin ribbon across the dust. Seeds are sown as before, but the shoots falter, yellowing before they can ripen. The soil, once generous, hardens beneath the Sunday hunger creeps back, more merciless now that people have grown to expect the earth's cooperation. In the past, when herds wandered elsewhere or fruit trees stood bare, families could pack their tools, sling their children on their backs, and move. But now their huts stand heavy in the earth, their storage pits dug deep. The people have tied themselves to the soil, and the soil has failed them. The wild cannot be trusted, either game has grown scarce, for the animals too follow water. Those who go hunting return empty-handed, their faces hollow, their silence louder than any cry. The pits of grain become lifelines, guarded fiercely. Mothers measure handfuls with trembling care, stretching rations thin. Children whimper at night, and the old go quiet, surrendering their share so others might endure. A new fear takes root. Not the fear of the hunt or of predators lurking in the dark, but the fear of the sky itself. All eyes lift upward, searching for clouds, waiting for storms that never come. Whispers stir around the fire. Have the gods turned away? Is the land cursed? Small rituals begin. Offerings of grain tossed into the flames, chants muttered at dawn. Anything to coax the rain. Yet the sky remains indifferent, the ground unyielding. For the first time, the people realize that their survival is chained not only to their labor, but to forces beyond their reach. Famine etches itself into memory. The youngest who survive will carry its shadow into adulthood, remembering the ache in their bellies when they see a dry field. The adults will learn caution, hoarding more when times are good, building deeper pits, weaving tighter lids. The village, though scarred, endures, but not unchanged. Hunger has taught a cruel truth. Dependence on the soil is also dependence on the heavens. When at last the rains return, breaking the drought with a sudden, violent storm, relief floods the huts. But joy is tempered by knowledge. They understand now that their new life carries a fragile bargain. To farm is to wait. To wait is to depend. And dependence means risk. The first famine has left its mark, shaping them into something harder, warier, and more determined than before. The memory of famine never fades. Even when the rains return and the fields once more sway with gold, the people cannot forget the emptiness of their stomachs, the sound of children crying through the night. Hunger becomes a ghost that haunts every harvest, whispering warnings into the ears of those who live by the soil. And in that fear, power begins to take shape. At first, it is the strongest among them who claim authority, the ones who guard the storage pits, who decide when and how the grain will be shared. But muscle alone cannot hold dominion for long. Soon, others step forward, men and women who claim a different strength, the ability to speak with the unseen. They stand before the people and declare that the rains, the floods, and the harvests are tied to forces beyond mortal hands, forces that must be honored, appeased, obeyed. These early priests hold ceremonies at the threshold of the granaries, scattering offerings of grain as if to prove their intimacy with the divine. And the people, remembering famine, bow their heads and obey. The pits become temples. The act of measuring grain becomes ritual. Bread is no longer only bread, it is survival. It is the favor of the gods. It is proof of who holds power and who kneels. Those who manage the stores decide which families eat well and which endure another night of hunger. Justice is not a matter of fairness but of favor. The granary is no longer simply a storehouse. It is the throne room of a new kind of rule. Chiefs emerge, their authority drawn not only from their strength in war, but from their control of food. A man with a spear may command for a day, but a man with a full storehouse commands for a lifetime. The first kings rise in this way, their crowns woven not from gold but from barley stalks, their palaces built upon the promise that their people will not starve. Yet beneath every display of power lies the same truth. Hunger is the leash. Those who control it control everything. The farmer bends his back to the soil not for himself but for the granary. The soldier sharpens his blade to defend not only land, but the harvest it yields. Even the gods themselves are invoked to sanctify the rule of those who hold the keys to the pits. Civilization begins to stratify. The hungry bow their heads, the rulers raise theirs, and the fragile balance of survival becomes the foundation of hierarchy. Hunger is no longer merely a shadow. It is now a weapon. And those who wield it stand above all others. The rivers carve empires. Along the Tigris and Euphrates, in the shadows of temples rising from clay, and beside the steady floods of the Nile, humanity begins to build not merely villages, but kingdoms. Their wealth is not counted first in jewels or metals, but in sacks of grain stacked high within guarded storehouses. The true currency of power is bread, and those who control its flow command the loyalty of thousands. In Mesopotamia, canals slice through the land like veins, carrying water from the rivers into thirsty fields. Farmers bend their backs beneath the sun, their labor filling the granaries of cities with names that echo through time. Babylon, Nineveh. The ziggurats rise not only as monuments to gods, but as symbols of control, for beneath their shadow lie the pits of grain that decide whether the people thrive or starve. To serve the king is to be fed, to defy him is to be left hungry. Across the desert sands, the Nile swells and retreats in its eternal rhythm. Egypt grows from its waters, each flood a promise of life, each drought a warning of death. The pharaoh, veiled as divine, is not simply ruler but provider. The people labor to build pyramids of stone, yet they kneel in gratitude not for the monuments but for the bread placed in their hands. To question his power is to question survival itself. Armies march beneath these banners, but their true purpose is seldom glory alone. Soldiers are mouths, and mouths must be fed. To conquer is to seize fertile land, to capture storehouses, to secure rivers and fields. Wars are waged not only with spears and chariots, but with the silent weight of hunger pressing upon the ranks. Victorious kings return not only with captives and spoils, but with wagons of grain that sustain their cities through lean seasons. Even in the splendor of palaces, hunger is never far. Every feast displayed before nobles is a reminder of the power drawn from fields worked by others. Every loaf broken in the temples is both offering and threat. Without obedience, the bread may vanish. Gold dazzles, but gold cannot be eaten. Grain sustains, and in sustaining, it rules. From Mesopotamia to Egypt, from the Fertile Crescent to the banks of the Nile, the blueprint of empire is written in stalks of wheat. Bread builds cities, feeds armies, sustains dynasties. Blood enforces it, and together, bread and blood lay the foundations of civilization's first empires, kingdoms whose walls may crumble, but whose lesson endures. The stomach rules the throne. Not all hunger is for grain. The body craves what bread alone cannot give, and in that craving, another treasure emerges. White crystals scraped from dry lake beds, harvested from coasts, chipped from ancient rock. Salt. At first it is scattered lightly over meat, rubbed into fish, a trick to keep food from rotting before it can be eaten. But soon, its power is understood. Salt does not simply flavor, it preserves. With salt, food endures the passing of days, weeks, even seasons. With salt, hunger is pushed back, time itself bent to human will. This power transforms salt into something more than seasoning. It becomes currency, a measure of wealth, a reason for journeys that stretch beyond familiar rivers and valleys. Trails worn by traders begin to cut across deserts and mountains, carrying blocks of salt on the backs of camels, donkeys, and men. Where salt flows, towns rise, their markets buzzing with exchange grain for salt, livestock for salt, even labor for salt. Bread may feed, but salt protects, and so it is treasured. Silence lingers in its absence. Families without salt watch their food spoil, their meat turn sour, their fish rot before it can be consumed. To lack salt is to return to hunger, no matter how full the granaries stand. And so whispers begin. Who controls the salt? Controls survival. Empires take notice. Kings levy taxes on it. Empires guard deposits of it. Armies march to claim it. Salt becomes reason enough for bloodshed. Across the Sahara, caravans stretch like slow-moving rivers, laden with slabs of salt as precious as gold. Along the coasts of the Mediterranean, salt pans glitter in the sun, shallow pools evaporating into wealth. In China, rulers discover that by controlling salt they control their people, issuing monopolies that fill royal coffers. In Rome, soldiers receive part of their wages in salt salarium, a word that lingers still in salary. What feeds the army is not only bread but the mineral that ensures its meat endures the march. Hunger expands, redefining itself. It is no longer simply the ache of an empty stomach, but the gnawing fear of loss, the knowledge that abundance without preservation is fleeting. Salt answers that fear, and in doing so, it reshapes the world. Roads are carved, markets bloom, wars ignite, all for crystals that vanish when stirred into water yet leave behind their taste. Salt, silent and invisible once consumed, commands empires as surely as kings. It seeps into language, into ritual, into trade, binding humanity's survival to its crystalline grasp. Hunger is no longer only for bread, it is for endurance, for tomorrow. And salt is the key. In the medieval village, life bends not around clocks or calendars, but around the stomach. The year is measured by hunger, the abundance of the harvest in autumn, the thinning stores in winter, the desperate hope of spring, and the relief of summer's growth. Each season carries its burden, each month its shadow. When the fields are full, the people eat with gratitude, but always with caution. For they know that winter waits, patient and merciless. Bread is their anchor. Coarse loaves of rye, barley, or oats fill the belly, though they often sit heavy and bitter on the tongue. Meat is rare, a luxury reserved for feasts, saints' days, or the tables of the Lord who owns the land. The peasant's diet is a cycle of sameness, gruel, bread, broth, yet each morsel is precious. A full stomach is never taken for granted. It is a victory against the relentless uncertainty of nature. When winter deepens, the hunger sharpens. Storage pits grow bare, granaries echo hollow, and families tighten their belts. The hungry gap arrives the weeks before the new harvest, when last year's stores are nearly gone and the fields are not yet ready to give again. Children cry through the nights, mothers ration crusts, fathers walk miles in search of scraps to barter. Hunger gnaws not only at the body but at the mind, fraying patience, sharpening tempers. Feasts, when they come, feel like defiance. A wedding, a holy day, a victory in war tables spread with bread, cheese, perhaps roasted meat offer not just nourishment but joy, a reminder that life is more than survival. Yet these moments are fleeting, soon swallowed again by the rhythm of scarcity. For most, the stomach rules all. Markets become battlegrounds when bread grows scarce. A sudden failure of crops, a lord raising taxes on grain, a merchant hoarding for profit, each is enough to spark unrest. Riots ignite not with speeches but with hunger, mobs demanding bread, storming stalls, tearing down carts. Kings and nobles learn quickly that their crowns rest not on their heads, but on the loaves in their people's hands. A hungry village is a dangerous village. The peasant's stomach is the true drumbeat of the medieval world. Cathedrals rise, castles tower, knights ride into battle. But beneath all of it lies the simple truth that every life bends to the harvest, to the bread, to the silence of an empty bowl. Hunger dictates prayer, rebellion, work, and rest. It is the unspoken ruler of the age, shaping history not with swords, but with the ache of countless bellies. The halls of the palace glitter with abundance. Long wooden tables sag beneath roasted meats, golden loaves, wheels of cheese, and flagons of wine. The king and his court dine by candlelight, their laughter rising with the smoke of roasted fowl. Servants hurry with platters, musicians play to fill the silence between courses, and not a thought is given to hunger. For here, in the high walls of power, the stomach is always full. The king never starves. Beyond the gates, the world tells another story. In the villages, fields blighted by poor harvests leave granaries bare. Families pick weeds from ditches, grinding roots, and bark into bitter pastes to trick their stomachs into silence. Children scavenge acorns, boiling them to strip away poison, while elders waste quietly in corners, surrendering their meager shares to the young. The contrast is stark, unbearable. The peasants bend their backs to work the land, yet it is the lords and kings who gorge upon its fruits. This imbalance is not hidden. The peasants know. They see the wagons of grain taken from their fields, wheeled past them to feed the lords' kitchens. They know the best cuts of meat are not for their tables but for banquets they will never attend. The hunger of the poor is the feast of the powerful. And each winter, as bellies hollow and bread thins to crumbs, resentment grows sharper than any blade. Hunger becomes anger. It simmers in silence, whispered around fires in hushed tones. Tales spread of kings who waste food, of nobles who feed dogs better than peasants feed their children. Every empty stomach becomes a wound, and every wound a reason to hate. The people endure, but their endurance is not endless. The ache in the belly begins to transform into the fire of rebellion. When famine presses too hard, the people turn to the streets. Markets erupt in fury, women demand bread, mobs overturn carts, shouting not for riches but for the simplest thing to eat. It is not philosophy that drives them, not lofty ideals, but hunger, raw and undeniable. A loaf of bread is worth more than any crown, and when that loaf is denied, crowns begin to topple. In the palaces, the king still feasts, unaware that every banquet stokes the fury outside his gates. He cannot imagine the storm rising in the hearts of the hungry, the storm that will one day break his throne. For while the king never starves, the people do, and history shows that starving people do not remain silent forever. Long before temples were built of stone, hunger itself was a god. It pressed upon the body and spirit, forcing people to explain its presence, to weave meaning into the emptiness of the stomach. To go without food was not only suffering but a form of communication with the divine. If the earth withheld her gifts, surely the heavens had a hand in it. If a village feasted, perhaps the gods were pleased. In this way, hunger became inseparable from faith. Fasting was born in many forms. To deny the stomach was to purify the soul, to sharpen the mind for prayer, to show humility before higher powers. Shamans starved themselves to invite visions. Prophets withdrew into deserts with little more than water, and monks embraced hunger as a path toward holiness. The ache of an empty stomach became a bridge between mortal and divine, proof of devotion written not in words, but in the body itself. The weaker the body, the stronger the spirit was believed to grow. Yet hunger was not always silence and denial, it was also abundance and offering. When harvests were good, when flocks multiplied, people gathered not only to eat but to share their bounty with gods and ancestors. Grain was poured onto altars, animals slaughtered in sacrifice, smoke from roasted meat rising like prayers. Feasts became rituals, where eating was not just survival but communion, a moment when the divine was believed to sit at the same table as mortals. The rhythm of hunger carved the calendar of religion. Days of fasting were followed by days of feasting, scarcity balanced by indulgence. Lent and Easter, Ramadan and Eid, Yom Kippur and Passover all carried the marks of hunger's sway. The faithful learned that to go without food was to cleanse, to endure suffering in solidarity with both gods and neighbors, and to feast was to celebrate divine mercy. Hunger itself became sacred, a teacher of humility and gratitude. But hunger could also turn cruel, reshaping faith in darker ways. During famines, prayers grew desperate, sacrifices more costly, superstitions more fervent. Entire villages knelt in fields, begging for rain, offering their last stores to unseen powers. When the stomach could not be filled, people sought meaning in ritual, even if it meant giving up the little they had left. Through fasting and feasting, sacrifice and offering, hunger bound humanity to something greater than itself. It taught that life was fragile, that survival was never guaranteed, and that perhaps the gods could be swayed by the growl of an empty belly or the smoke of a shared feast. In this way, hunger became not just a trial of the body, but a pillar of the spirit. It began with whispers from the east, rumors of a sickness that hollowed out entire towns, leaving only silence and the stench of decay. By the time it reached Europe, the whispers had become a scream. The Black Death spread like fire through dry grass, carried by rats and their fleas, by merchants on roads, by ships docking at crowded ports. In its shadow, not only bodies fell, but fields, villages, and the fragile web of survival that bound them together. Hunger and plague intertwined. As sickness thinned the countryside, the hands that once tended crops were stilled. Wheat grew wild, uncut and uncollected, until rains rotted it back into the earth. Orchards bore fruit that no one harvested, and granaries, once guarded with suspicion, stood abandoned as their owners lay in shallow graves. The plague devoured people, and famine devoured what remained. Villages shrank to ghosts. In some places, only a handful of survivors staggered among empty homes, feeding on whatever they could find: roots, scraps, even the bark of trees. Livestock wandered untended, fields returned to wilderness, and hunger became a second enemy, striking even where the sickness had not yet reached. The rhythm of planting and harvesting, so deeply woven into the medieval year, collapsed into chaos. Despair was not only in the stomach but in the spirit. Churches filled with the smell of death, prayers rising louder but seeming to fall unheard. Some believed the famine and plague were punishments from God, answers to human sin. Others blamed outsiders, witches, or the alignment of stars. Yet no explanation could quiet the growl of empty bellies or the terror of bodies wasting away. For the poor, the suffering was unbearable, but even the rich, who once thought themselves shielded by walls and privilege, found that neither coin nor crown could buy safety. Kings, priests, and merchants starved alongside peasants when food failed to move across dying roads. The hunger of Europe became universal, a grim equality carved by disease. And yet, out of the wreckage, change slowly stirred. With so many dead, land lay open and abandoned. Survivors, fewer in number, found that their labor had new value. Fields that once tied peasants to lords now promised freedom, wages, and choice. Hunger remained, but it no longer bent the people quite as low. The great deaths, though born of despair, cracked open the old order and planted the first seeds of a new one. The Black Death was more than a plague, it was a famine of bodies, of harvests, of hope. Together, disease and hunger rewrote the story of Europe, leaving scars that shaped centuries to come. The ocean was a gamble, vast and merciless, but hunger gave men the courage to sail into its unknown reaches. Not the hunger of empty stomachs this time, but the hunger of taste, of longing for flavors that could transform a meal of bread and salted fish into something wondrous. Spices, pepper, cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg were more than luxuries. They preserved meat, masked rot, and carried with them the scent of distant, exotic lands. To possess them was to possess power, wealth, and prestige. Europe's appetite stretched far beyond its borders. Merchants whispered of islands where sugar grew like gold, where spices were as common as weeds. The pursuit of these treasures drove ships from Portugal, Spain, and beyond across waters that no European maps had dared to chart. Each voyage was a wager against starvation, storms, and shipwreck. Barrels of dried biscuits, hard cheese, and salted meat filled the holds, yet the men often wasted away, their gums rotting from scurvy, their bellies aching from scarcity. Hunger traveled with them even as it propelled them forward. When land was found, conquest followed. The hunger for flavor became the hunger for empire. Sugarcane fields spread across the Caribbean, their sweetness feeding European tables, while enslaved Africans paid the price with their bodies and their freedom. Pepper and cinnamon, once worth their weight in gold, redrew trade routes and shifted the balance of global power. The thirst for coffee, the craving for chocolate, the bite of chili, all were carried across oceans, stitching together continents with both wonder and violence. But beneath every new taste was the old shadow of hunger. Indigenous peoples were starved of their lands, their foodways uprooted and replaced by monocultures designed to please distant markets. Famines followed in the wake of colonization, when traditional systems of sustenance were destroyed to make way for sugar, tobacco, and spice. Hunger for flavor in Europe meant hunger for survival elsewhere. At home, the tables of the wealthy transformed. Meals once bland became feasts of sensation, every bite a reminder of distant conquests. To sprinkle pepper was to summon the East, to sweeten tea was to bind together continents in a single cup. Hunger had leapt beyond survival, beyond the filling of bellies. It had become desire, indulgence, empire itself. And yet for sailors, slaves, and peasants, the ache of the stomach never faded. They endured the bitter crusts, the hard biscuits, the relentless work that made those flavors possible. The age of exploration was painted in spices and sugar, but beneath the sweetness lay a familiar truth. Hunger, in all its forms, was still the hand steering the rudder. In the cold soil of the Andes, high above sea level, the potato had been a quiet companion to the people who first cultivated it. Small, hardy, and full of sustenance, it grew where little else would. For centuries, it remained unknown to the wider world. But when European ships carried the tuber across the ocean, they brought with it a force far greater than anyone imagined. At first, the potato was met with suspicion. Strange in shape, born from foreign soil, it was mistrusted by farmers who clung to their grains. Some said it caused illness, others whispered it was unfit for Christian tables because it grew hidden underground. Yet hunger has a way of dissolving doubt. When wheat harvests failed, when rye withered, the potato thrived. It needed little water, could grow in poor soil, and yielded far more calories per acre than any grain. Slowly, the tuber claimed its place in European fields. Its arrival transformed villages. Where once families starved during lean years, potatoes kept them alive. Populations grew, not because hunger disappeared, but because for the first time in centuries, it could be held at bay. The potato became the bread of the poor, a quiet shield against famine. Empires expanded on the strength of bellies filled with this simple root. Soldiers marched further, laborers worked longer, cities swelled with new life. The resilience of the potato became the resilience of nations. Yet the power of the tuber was a double-edged gift. Dependence on a single crop made societies fragile. When disease struck the potato fields, as it did in Ireland in the 19th century, the result was catastrophe. Blight turned once healthy harvests into blackened rot, and millions faced starvation. Entire families fled across oceans, carrying with them stories of hunger that reshaped the lands they settled. The very crop that had once saved Europe now revealed the danger of placing survival in the hands of one plant. Still, history cannot deny the potato's role in shaping the modern world. It fed revolutions, sustained armies, and allowed populations to surge to numbers that grain alone could never have supported. From the terraces of the Andes to the crowded streets of European cities, the humble tuber carried a quiet, relentless power. The story of the potato is the story of survival and fragility, of abundance and collapse. It reminds us that even the smallest thing pulled from the soil can alter the course of nations. Hunger made the potato necessary, and the potato, in turn, rewrote the destiny of humanity. Paris was a city of ideas, a city where philosophers debated liberty and equality in smoky salons. But beneath the lofty words was a simpler truth. The revolution was fed not by books alone, but by hunger. For the people who crowded the narrow streets and dim cellars of the capital, the cry was not for theories but for bread. The price of grain had climbed beyond reach. Harvests failed, merchants hoarded, and the loaves that once filled market stalls grew scarce. Families stood in long lines at dawn, clutching coins that bought less with each passing week. Mothers wept when they returned home empty-handed, children cried through the night, and men cursed the bakers, the nobles, and the king himself. For when bread disappeared, patience followed. Bread was more than food. It was the foundation of life, the centerpiece of every table, rich or poor. To take it away was to strip people of hope, Whispers turned to shouts, and shouts became mobs. Women stormed the markets, overturning stalls, demanding flour. Crowds marched to the gates of the bakeries, fists raised, stones in hand, shouting for bread or blood. The palace at Versailles glittered with banquets. The tables of the aristocracy groaned under meats, wines, and delicacies. The contrast was unbearable. While nobles feasted, the people of Paris starved. This vision of injustice ignited fury more than any pamphlet or speech could. The starving masses looked at their king not as a ruler chosen by God, but as the hoarder of their grain, the enemy of their stomachs. The March on Versailles, when women walked miles demanding bread for their families, was as revolutionary as any declaration written on parchment. Their footsteps thundered louder than cannons. Hunger had carried them there, hunger armed them with courage, and hunger refused to leave without answers. The king could sign decrees and philosophers could write treatises, but it was the empty stomach that moved the revolution forward. When the Bastille fell, it was not only the symbol of tyranny that crumbled, but the assurance that people would endure starvation in silence. From that day on, every ruler in Europe knew a dangerous truth. A hungry people are not loyal. A hungry people do not wait. The French Revolution was indeed a battle for liberty, equality, and fraternity, but beneath those banners was a simpler, sharper cry. It was the growl of empty bellies echoing through the streets of Paris. Hunger was the spark, hunger was the fuel, and hunger was the revolt itself. The Industrial Revolution is remembered for its smoke and steel, for the great machines that roared in endless rhythm, and for the cities that swelled with new life. But behind the noise of progress, there was another rhythm, quieter yet far more painful, the sound of stomachs growling in hunger. For while factories rose like monuments to human ingenuity, the meals of those who labored inside them grew smaller and smaller. Families who had once lived close to the land now crowded into dark tenements near mills and foundries. In the countryside, they had at least scratched food from the soil, gathered what they could from forests and streams, or kept a few animals. In the city, survival depended on wages, and wages rarely stretched far enough to fill a family's table. Bread and potatoes became the staples, thin broth stretched to last, and meat was often no more than a memory. Children, some no older than 5 or 6, trudged into factories before the sun rose. Their hands were small enough to reach between gears, their bodies light enough to crawl under looms, and their hunger made them obedient. For a few pennies a day, they worked 10, 12, even 14 hours, returning home exhausted to bowls of watery porridge or crusts of stale bread. Childhood was not measured in play or learning, but in shifts, worked and bites swallowed. Hunger was the silent fuel of the Industrial Revolution. It kept workers at their posts, for to lose a job was to invite starvation. It kept wages low, for the desperate would accept almost anything, and it allowed factories to flourish, built on the backs of men, women, and children who labored with empty stomachs. Progress was not only measured in machines produced or coal mined, but in how long people could endure the gnawing ache while still returning to work the next day. The wealthy industrialists, the new kings of this age, dined well. Their tables bore roast meats, fine wines, and delicacies imported from across the world. They spoke of innovation and prosperity, of civilization moving forward. Yet in the alleys beyond their estates, mothers whispered to crying children that there was no more food until morning, and fathers pawned the last of their possessions for a loaf. The contrast was sharp, and it deepened resentment as much as it deepened hunger. Even the workhouses, built under the guise of charity, became prisons of starvation. Those who entered found food so meager and conditions so harsh that many preferred to risk hunger outside rather than accept the cruel mercy within. Hunger became not just a condition of the poor, but a weapon wielded against them, a way to control, discipline, and extract labor without question. Yet from this hunger, voices began to rise. Workers organized, demanding fair wages and shorter hours. They spoke of bread alongside rights, of the dignity of a full meal alongside the dignity of labor. Their strikes and protests were often met with violence, but the seed had been planted. Hunger had carried them into the factories, but hunger also taught them to fight for change. The Industrial Revolution clothed the world in smoke, iron, and invention, but beneath its grandeur lay the simple truth that its gears were greased by empty stomachs. Children's bellies, women's hands, men's backs, all paid the price so the machines could turn. Hunger did not merely accompany the revolution. Hunger was its engine, silent yet relentless, shaping both the suffering of millions and the birth of a new working world. Empires were built on promises of power and prosperity, but for those who lived under their rule, the story was often one of hunger. The wealth of the empire flowed into the coffers of distant capitals, while its subjects struggled to fill their stomachs. Grain, sugar, and cotton crossed oceans in endless streams, yet the very people who harvested them starved in silence. In Ireland, the potato had become the foundation of life. It was cheap, nutritious, and able to sustain entire families on small plots of land. For the poor, it was not simply food, it was survival. When blight struck in the mid-19th century, blackening fields and rotting tubers, disaster followed swiftly. The potato, once the shield against hunger, became its cruel betrayer. Millions faced famine, yet Ireland still exported food to England. Grain and livestock left Irish ports under armed guard, while villagers with hollow cheeks and swollen bellies watched from the roadside. The empire protected its trade, but not its people. The Great Hunger emptied villages, drove millions across the ocean, and left scars that would never heal. Far across the world, Bengal faced its own devastation. In 1943, famine swept through the land, claiming millions of lives. The rice harvest had faltered, but it was not failure of crops alone that doomed Bengal. Colonial policies diverted food to feed armies and supply distant markets, while the people of Bengal were left with scraps. Prices soared, hoarders thrived, and the poorest, unable to buy even a handful of rice, perished in the streets. Children with skeletal limbs begged for food beside warehouses stacked with grain bound for other shores. The famine was not simply a natural disaster. It was the cost of empire, paid in human lives. These tragedies were not accidents, nor isolated events. They were the product of a system that valued profit above survival. Colonies were treated as fields to be harvested, not homes for the people who lived there. When hunger came, it was seen as a local misfortune, not an imperial responsibility. Relief was slow, grudging, or absent altogether. The suffering of millions was weighed against the balance sheets of empire, and more often than not, hunger was allowed to spread unchecked. Yet hunger also became resistance. In Ireland, the memory of the Great Famine fueled a longing for independence, a determination that never again would a foreign crown decide who ate and who starved. In India, the Bengal famine hardened the resolve of those who demanded freedom, proof that empire cared little for the lives of its subjects. Hunger turned grief into anger, and anger into the will to break free. The famines of empire remind us that starvation is rarely only about food. It is about power, about who controls the land, the harvest, and the flow of resources. In the hands of empire, hunger was not merely an accident of nature but a weapon of control, a consequence of exploitation. And while the empire grew fat on the wealth of its colonies, millions of its subjects wasted away, their suffering etched forever into the memory of nations. In the 20th century, hunger once again marched alongside soldiers. The world wars were not fought only with bullets and bombs, but with bread, sugar, and meat. Behind every front line stretched supply lines, and behind every army stood the civilian populations who endured the endless question of how to eat. Rations became the common language of survival. During the First World War, governments quickly discovered that feeding millions of soldiers while keeping their citizens alive at home was as decisive as any strategy on the battlefield. Bread was stretched with fillers, meat was scarce, and sugar became a memory. Families queued for hours outside bakeries, clutching ration cards like tickets to survival. To waste food was to commit a crime not just against the household, but against the nation itself. The Second World War only deepened this reality. Nations rationed every essential, dividing loaves, sticks of butter, and spoonfuls of sugar with mathematical precision. In Britain, The Ministry of Food issued charts and pamphlets, urging people to grow vegetables in backyards and parks. Dig for victory became a battle cry, with carrots and cabbages standing in for guns and tanks. Housewives learned to stretch flour into countless meals. Children grew up knowing that sweets were treasures to be savored, and entire populations lived under the shadow of controlled hunger. For those under occupation, hunger was far darker. Armies seized harvests to feed themselves, leaving the conquered to starve. In Eastern Europe, villages were stripped bare, and people boiled grass, bark, and even leather to quiet the emptiness inside. In cities under siege, like Leningrad, hunger became the most relentless enemy. Citizens endured winters with only scraps of bread mixed with sawdust. Thousands perished each week, not from bullets, but from the slow collapse of bodies denied nourishment. Hunger, in these moments, was as deadly as artillery. Yet hunger was not only a weakness, it was also a weapon. Armies learned that starving an enemy could break their spirit more efficiently than battle. Crops were burned, livestock slaughtered or stolen, blockades cut off supplies. Famine was manufactured as a tool of war, leaving civilians to pay the price for military victories. The growl of the stomach could determine the fall of a city as surely as a cannon blast. But hunger also shaped resilience. Rationing fostered solidarity. Communities learned to share, to make do, to adapt. Women became the generals of the kitchen, turning scraps into sustenance, keeping families alive when the official allotments fell short. In some cases, rationing improved public health, as diets shifted away from excess and toward balanced necessity. Hunger taught discipline, patience, and endurance, virtues that became weapons of their own. When the wars ended, the memory of ration books lingered. Even in peace, people remembered the thin slices of bread, the hollow cupboards, the lines outside shops. They remembered how hunger had dictated strategy, toppled regimes, and tested the will of nations. The lesson was etched in every generation that lived through it. Wars are not decided only by generals or by battles, but by whether a people can eat long enough to keep fighting. Hunger had shaped the battlefield as surely as any weapon forged in steel. For most of history, hunger was a mystery. People knew the ache of emptiness, the weakness that followed, the sickness that came when food was scarce. But they did not know why one meal sustained longer than another, why some foods gave strength while others filled the belly but left the body frail. It was only in the modern age that hunger began to be studied, measured, and named. Science turned the invisible pains of the stomach into numbers, charts, and formulas. The discovery of calories marked the beginning. Food was no longer only bread or meat, but a store of energy that could be quantified. A potato, a piece of meat, a slice of bread each carried with it a certain amount of fuel. Hunger, once seen only as a curse of nature or the will of the gods, could now be understood as the body's demand for energy. For the first time, the problem of hunger had a mathematical solution. Then came vitamins. Diseases that had haunted humanity for centuries suddenly revealed their secrets. Scurvy, long the scourge of sailors, was traced to the absence of vitamin C. Rickets, which twisted the bones of children, came from a lack of vitamin D. Pellagra, beriberi, and countless other illnesses were not punishments from the heavens, but signals from the body that it was starving for something more than calories. The language of hunger grew richer. Proteins, minerals, amino acids. Each word carved a new understanding, a new tool to fight back against the age-old enemy. Governments began to take notice. If hunger could be measured, then it could also be managed. Nutrition guidelines were written, rationing systems refined, and school meal programs introduced. Soldiers were fed not only to fill their bellies but to maximize strength and endurance. Children were measured, weighed, and charted to ensure they grew according to scientific standards. Hunger, once a private struggle, became a matter of state policy. The science of hunger also carried hope. Farmers learned how to enrich soil, how to breed crops with more nutrients, how to fortify flour with iron or salt with iodine. Milk was strengthened with vitamin D to prevent rickets, bread enriched to fight anemia. Each discovery pulled humanity a step further from the shadow of mass starvation. And yet, hunger remained. Science could measure and describe it, But control was never perfect. Poverty, war, and inequality ensured that millions still lived with empty stomachs. To know the name of a vitamin did not guarantee its presence on the plate. The calorie could be counted, but it could not be conjured from thin air. Still, the birth of nutritional science marked a turning point. For the first time in 10,000 years, humanity held a map of hunger's secrets. The growl of the stomach could now be translated into data, and from that data came the possibility of control. Hunger had not been defeated, but it was no longer unknowable. It could be studied, predicted, and, at least in part, tamed. The war with hunger had entered the laboratory, and from there, the modern struggle would take its next shape. In the modern world, hunger wears a new mask. No longer is it only the hollow stomach of the peasant or the barren field of the farmer. Now it exists in a world of abundance, a world where supermarkets overflow with aisles of bread, fruit, and frozen meals, where restaurants line city streets, and food advertisements glow brighter than temples once did. On the surface, hunger should have been conquered. Yet the truth is more complicated. Hunger has not vanished. It has simply changed shape. For millions, hunger still begins with poverty. A family may pass by aisles filled with food, but lack the money to buy it. Shelves groan under the weight of produce, meat, and grains, yet these are luxuries beyond reach. In crowded cities, food deserts stretch for miles, places where fast food and corner stores replace fresh markets. The problem is not the absence of food, but the absence of access. Hunger has shifted from scarcity of supply to scarcity of opportunity. And even when food is available, another kind of hunger lurks. Processed abundance fills stomachs but leaves bodies weak. Cheap calories are everywhere. Sweetened drinks, instant noodles, fried snacks, boxes of food that last months on the shelf. They silence the growl of the stomach, but they do not nourish. This is a different famine, one of hidden malnutrition, where people are overweight yet starving for vitamins, minerals, and true sustenance. The body hungers in ways the tongue does not notice. Children grow on this diet of abundance without nourishment. Their bones form but lack strength. Their bodies grow but fight constant illness. Adults work long hours, fueled by sugar and salt, yet feel perpetually exhausted. Hunger in the age of plenty is no longer about famine fields or failed harvests. It is about a silent emptiness inside the body, a hunger measured not by lack of food but by lack of health. Governments and scientists recognize this paradox. They speak of food insecurity, not just hunger. They warn of obesity alongside malnutrition, of diabetes alongside starvation. Aid programs fight not only to deliver food but to deliver the right kind of food. Farmers are urged to plant vegetables, not only corn or wheat. Policies aim to bring fresh produce to poor neighborhoods, but the challenges remain vast. Hunger also becomes political. Nations produce enough to feed billions, yet food is wasted on a massive scale. Mountains of bread and meat rot in landfills, while families scrape together meals of scraps. The age of plenty has created both excess and deprivation, both luxury and despair. Hunger, once born from drought and barren soil, now thrives in inequality and neglect. And so humanity stands at a strange moment in its long history with hunger. 10,000 years ago, the first farmers bent over their crops, desperate for survival. Today, the shelves of the modern world are heavy with food, yet millions still ache with emptiness. Hunger has not been defeated. It has only changed its battlefield. No longer fought with the plow alone, it is now fought with policy, with justice, and with the choices society makes about how food is grown, shared, and valued. Hunger in the age of plenty is not a problem of the earth. It is a problem of humanity itself. 10,000 years have passed since the first family bent over the soil in the Fertile Crescent, scattering seeds in hope and hunger. That act began a story that shaped the destiny of humankind. From the mud huts of the first villages to the sprawling cities of the present age, hunger has never truly left us. It has changed its shape, shifted its battlegrounds, and worn new faces, but it remains, pressing against the human stomach as both teacher and tyrant. Now, in the modern age, humanity once again finds itself staring into the mouth of hunger. The planet, once thought to be an endless provider, shows its limits. Climate change dries rivers, scorches fields and floods valleys. Crops that once grew reliably now fail without warning. Ancient patterns of rain are disrupted, and entire regions find their harvests vanishing. Hunger, the old architect, begins drawing new blueprints across the globe. At the same time, the population surges. Billions of mouths must be fed, each one requiring not just calories but nourishment. Every newborn arrives with a future stomach to fill, and the question grows louder. Can the earth provide enough for all? For the first time in history, humanity has the tools to measure this problem in exact numbers. We know how much grain can be harvested, how much water can be spared, how much energy it takes to put food on a plate. Yet knowledge does not always lead to security. The scales of hunger tip precariously. Technology races to meet the challenge. Scientists experiment with lab-grown meat, with vertical farms rising like glass towers in cities, with seeds engineered to survive heat and drought. Oceans may one day provide protein in ways we cannot yet imagine. Entire meals may be created from powders, liquids, or even printed on machines. The stomach of the future may not resemble the diet of the past, but the question remains the same: will it be filled? And still, hunger is not just about food. It is about who has access, who controls the granaries, who decides the price of bread. Just as in the first cities, power gathers where food gathers. The politics of hunger may define the next century as sharply as it defined the birth of kingdoms and empires. Revolutions in the past were ignited by empty bowls. It is not impossible that the revolutions of the future may rise from the same spark. So here humanity stands, 10,000 years after its first gamble with seeds and soil, surrounded by abundance yet shadowed by crisis, holding knowledge yet wrestling with inequality. The story of hunger is not finished. It continues. Written in the soil, in the markets, in the very ache of the body when food is scarce. The future stomach waits, silent but insistent. It waits in every child born today, in every harvest still to come, in every decision made about how food is grown and shared. And the great question hovers over humanity once more. Will the next revolution begin, as the first one did with an empty bowl,